four-time Emmy Award-winning producer, Frank Pace, and retired New York City firefighter, 9/11 first responder, and Vietnam vet, Billy O'Connor. Brought to you by We Can Coffee Company, manufacturer of freshly roasted premium coffee blends delivered directly to your door.
This week's guest, former New England Patriots general manager, Upton.Bell.
My brother Frankie, how are you today?
Good, how are you?
And he better gotta be jealous of me. You look great. How you doing?
What's that in your hand?
It's my coffee, brother. This is the
We got a new sponsor? We do have a new sponsor, We Can Coffee Company.
We Can Coffee. It's good stuff, too.
Yeah,
man.
great
Good stuff.
Great.
Man.
Happy to have him. Our guest today is Upton.Bell.
Wow.
Author of Present at the Creation, former general manager of the New England Patriots, and the son of the legendary
Bert Bell.
So
first NFL commissioner?
No, he was the second NFL commissioner, but he was the most influential commissioner of all.
Well, we'll talk about that when we get up to, but it's great that you have this particular juncture in time in conjunction with the release of our book, Lamar's Gamble.
Really?
Yeah, you must have thought about this, planned ahead a bit.
Well, why don't you read us a chapter?
Yeah, maybe I will. Well, I won't read you a chapter.
Well,
but,
read us an excerpt.
Yes, I will. I'd be proud to, actually, because I love the way this book is written, oddly enough.
Yes, and with your accent, it's it's appropriate for what you're going to read.
All right. This is on the premise that everything's on the level.
Why don't you hold the book up, too, also?
Yes, I will.
So you can see what you're reading.
And one of my beliefs is that the only two things that are really on the level is professional wrestling. So this is on the on the premise that nothing's really on the level. But this is a direct quote. In his office, a furious Rosenblum and a concerned Art Modell listened through a speakerphone as Pete Rozelle stuttered through the other end. The feds have 4 witnesses willing to swear in court that they placed bets for you on and against the Colts, ranging from $500,000 to $1 million. They're testifying. It's going to get ugly. Shut the hell up and listen to me, Rosenblum said. You fix this. That's why we hired you. Fix it or we'll get another commissioner. You'll be out of football on your ass. The wise guys won't like this, Pete, Modell said. Get it fixed. We don't need the feds poking around.
Yeah, and there's a lot more of that.
Oh, there's plenty of it. And the postscript, I mean, just about really justifies everything we had said.
Yeah, put it next to the other book,
we had
please.
written. Sure, I will. Who could figure that's where it belongs?
Say hello to Derek Harris.
Mr. D.
What's up, fellas?
How you doing, brother? Everything good?
Everything's great. Billy's got a tan. Frank's got a smile on his face. It's a good day.
It is indeed. It is indeed.
And I usually look like a bottle of milk. I got that Irish skin. You know, I go out in the pool, and first thing they do is get the burn unit ready. Irishman near the pool.
Well, keep the. As far as the burn unit is concerned, we threw the blanket in the burn unit also.
Thank God for that.
The blanket that was on the table last week.
We might have did a lot for the government's COVID problem. Might have really helped the cause. So we did our bit.
So I'm smiling because for the first time, we got more than 10,000 viewers on the Joe Rigobudo podcast. We had over 10,000 viewers.
And that's more than we had with Artist Gilmore.
Yeah, Artist was about 9. And we're moving on up in the world. Moving on up to the east side, to a deluxe apartment in the sky high.
You know,
we're moving on.
He knows all of it. I'm telling you, he knows them all. I read an article about 3 days ago. It was in the papers, one of the headlines. That a guy from the 49ers had died at 49 years old of TCE.
Yeah.
And I flashed right away. TCE, yeah, it's traumatic. Yeah, it's
brain injuries. Tell him. I can't hear you in my headphones.
CTE, I'm sorry. Yeah, right.
I can't hear you in my headphones, so I don't know what you're saying.
CTE.
CTE.
Right. Yes, CTE. Yes. Concussion, traumatic, something or other.
Encephalitis.
It's definitely not TCE.
Well, I'm a bit dyslexic.
That's a rap group, isn't it?
I think he's
TCB.
But in any case, on a serious note, the guy died at 49 years old. And of course, I segued immediately back to the Dwight Hicks interview that we had last week
About Mike Webster.
about Mike Webster. And my God almighty, I mean, Dwight talked about how he pulled all the teeth out of his head and then crazy glued them back in.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a lot of shots to the head. I wonder if Frank, and I don't know, I'm not a medical guy, and
You're not?
no, it's hard to believe.
I'm surprised that you're not a medical guy.
Because before I got that vaccine, Frank, I analyzed it. I want to know everything that was in there, you know?
Don't say vaccine around Dirk.
No, he's not into it?
No, he's an anti-vaxxer, but don't go there. Don't go there.
Okay. But I'm wondering
I
if
should be.
what we used to call punch drunk
Yeah,
is the same kind of thing as
Absolutely.
CT.
absolutely.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah. You're not a medical guy, huh?
No. But I know what the term punch drunk is.
Oh, you should. you more than anybody else in this room should know what the term punch drunk means.
It's like one of your old friends, Gene Wilder. I remember a movie, a Woody Allen movie, actually, where the guy was screwing a sheep, you know, like he comes into a psychiatrist's office, and Gene Wilder was a psychiatrist. And this old Greek guy comes in with his sheep name was Daisy, and he says that he loves the sheep. And Gene Wilder looks at him sincerely and says, listen, Mr. Kabakabis, or whatever he was, the Greek, he says, I'm not that kind of doctor. He says, you know, you're crazy. You need a psychiatrist. That's the kind of guy I said, you're crazy. But yeah, so I mean, I don't know the medical terms, but so you think punch drunk is the same thing, pretty much as
Yes, I do.
CT. Okay.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
Hey,
I-
what do you
yes,
think
I
about Ali? Do you think Ali had at the end of his life, we were called that
Yes,
punch
I
drunk
do.
30 years earlier, right?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
And Joe Frazier and Joe Lewis and everybody else that went before.
So how come I'm like that, Frank? I never got I never got hit that much.
Because you were blackout drunk, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, you hit your head on the ground 100 times in a row.
I hit it on the
It's like a concussion.
I hit it on the bar a lot.
Same
yeah.
thing like getting hit by Art Donovan, who will talk to Upton.Bell about.
Uncle Artie. My
Uncle
friend's
Artie.
Uncle Artie. My
Uncle
friend
Artie.
Joe Blank's uncle. I think Art Donovan did some time in Guadalcanal too.
Yeah.
He was a CB.
I'm sure.
But he went to the same grammar school as me, same high school.
We'll save it for Upton.
Yeah. Yeah, I will. I'm looking forward to interviewing him. He's going to be a really illuminating guest.
Hey, Billy, how many times do you think you blacked out in your?
Oh, I mean, I didn't even think I didn't consider myself drunk if I could remember what I did the night before. Like if somebody said, which is a famous Irish saying, you know, 6 guys go out and get hammered, and they said, well, were you drunk? No, I mean, everybody else was drunk. I just had a few beers, you know. But I really didn't consider it drunk if I remembered what I did the night before. So, I mean, and sometimes that would go on for days.
Yeah, 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
From what I
even
understand.
4.
From what I understand.
My friend Buffalo, I mean, I was drinking when a guy was 320 pounds. I mean, he was like a football player, and I wasn't anywhere near the capacity he had. Like Buffalo used to drink out of a gallon glass. You know, he had this glass, and he said, I promised my wife I'd only have 2 drinks. He said. And he put a whole half a thing of vodka in there, and put a little juice in there. But Buffalo, Lord of mercy on him, McKillop, for the guys from the Bronx that remember Buffalo, he was a legend in the Bronx. And before he died, Lord of mercy on him, a couple of months before he died, I called him up. I said, hey, Buff, what's this bullshit I hear that you got, that, what do you call it when you got too much sugar in your body?
Diabetes.
Diabetes. Yeah, I got a mental thing there.
Yeah, you're a medical doctor.
Yeah, that sugar thing, you know? What do you call that sugar thing?
I'm not a doctor.
It's like
I'm
Michael
smart.
J. Fox. What's that thing he's got? The twitch? What are they? Anyway, the twitch, you know, the medical
Actually,
term.
In the South, they
Parkinson's.
call it sugar.
So I said to him, I called him up on the phone. I said, Buffalo, what's this I hear you got diabetes? He said, yeah, they took a couple of my toes. I said, well, stop drinking, you son of a bitch. What's the story with you? He goes, no, I did. I stopped. I said, what are you doing now? He said, I'm eating a box of Oreos. I said, you stupid bastard. And I said to him, I said, you know, I'm lucky that, considering I used to drink with you all the time, that I didn't get diabetes.
Yeah.
He says, you're lucky you didn't get a concussion. He goes, all the time you had hit the bar and I had to pick you up. But yeah, he carried me from bar to bar.
Well,
I mean, there was, I'd wake up at another bar.
didn't know how you got there.
But he always made sure I had $40 or $50 on the bar anyway. He always made sure I carried my own weight. Somehow he got into my pocket and decorated the mahogany.
Well, we're going to spend a lot of time with Upton.Bell
Cool.
today. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to Upton. But before we bring on Upton.Bell, let me tell you about our new sponsor, Weekend Coffee. We're very enthused about this new sponsor, not only because the way they make great freshly roasted premium blends of coffee, which, by the way, they deliver straight to your door. Their beans are carefully roasted in small batches to give coffee a rich, smooth, and fresh taste. They also have a variety of offered options to choose from. So to learn more, pick up some Weekend Coffee.
Weekend Coffee.
What do you tell us about their promotion they got going with the military and first responders?
Oh, Frank, as a veteran and former, New York City firefighter myself, first responder, it's cool to have a partner like Weekend Coffee. They recognize the importance of our military and the first responders who served our nation. And Weekend Coffee donates a free bag of coffee to a first responder or a military family for every 10 bags of coffee they sell. So that's really, really cool. And there's nothing better than having a good cup of coffee and giving it back, giving something back to the people that took good care of us. So if you're interested in Weekend Coffee, and you should be, log into weekendcoffeecompany.com and be sure to check out their Wall of Honor section.
Great.
Which is really good for us.
Great. Here's to Weekend Coffee. Okay. So now to bring on Upton.Bell. And I want to bring on a little blurb off the back of his book, Present at the Creation, by Bob Ryan. Upton.Bell did not grow up like you and me. Your father was not the NFL commissioner who created the draft model now followed by all professional sports. Your mother was not a Broadway star. His parents were each of those things. You were not a 33-year-old general manager of a pro football team or a radio and TV host. I can say with certainty you have not met the people he's met or had the experiences we had. And no offense, I doubt you are as funny or insightful as Upton.Bell on a variety of topics. With that, let's find out how funny and insightful he is. We can bring on Upton.Bell.
Present at the Creation.
All right, guys, we got Upton on.
Hey, there he is. How are you, my friend?
I'm great.
Meet Billy O'Connor.
Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Bell. A real pleasure. Upton.
Derek Harris.
Hello.
Call me Upton.
Upton.
Nobody calls me Mister.
Well, it's indeed a great pleasure to have you. We got all sorts of things we want to discuss with you, but let's get right into it. Tell us about Carroll Rosenblum.
Well, I will say this, and you guys know, being in Hollywood, there's so many different characters, but he is probably one of the most interesting people I've ever met. You like him, you can be afraid of him. He is brilliant. He has so many components to him. It's hard to pin anyone down. And it's interesting because as we go through today in talking about him, one of the things that I would have to say from the very beginning, and Frank, and you guys know, Billy, that in Hollywood, you have to be nice to some people maybe you don't want to be nice to. But in the case of Rosenblum, all the things that I would say about him, whether it was the gambling, whether it was all the things that he was involved in, he was the first and only one who gave me a job when my father dropped dead.
And your father was Bert Bell, the commissioner of the NFL.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that he had talked to Rosenblum a couple of times, although I didn't know until after he had dropped dead that he had made a secret deal with the Philadelphia National Bank to buy back his old team, the Eagles, because he knew he was sick. We didn't know how sick he was.
Your dad was sick.
But, yeah, he was sick, but you never know. People in those days, they hid everything. But basically, he used to say to Rosenblum, he said, I want a piece of that team for my kids someday. And the reason he asked it is, and this is, again, you guys are out there in make-believe land. In the 20s, before Bert Bell became a coach, Carroll Rosenblum actually was one of the leading backs in the Ivy League. He was a tremendous football player.
Wow.
And
Carroll
he was going to
Carroll
Rosenblum.
Because I know your dad.
Yes.
Your dad was also at the University of Pennsylvania.
Well, my father had thrown the first pass in Rose Bowl history. in 1970, and also was one of the leading quarterbacks in America. And also, I have in a permanent exhibition out at UMass. He was the drop kicking champion. I have his trophy from 1970.
Wow, drop kicks.
Drop
We're
kick.
talking Jim birthdays here.
Bring it back, boys. So basically, Rosenblum was unhappy with the coach he had pinned. Now, the coach was, of all people, John Heisman of the Heisman Trophy. And
Incredible.
basically, Rosenblum said, I'm leaving. Myself and Marty Brill are going to go to Notre Dame. And my father stopped him. He said, listen, you got the rest of your life. This is where your family is from Baltimore, West Virginia. This is where you belong. Don't leave. So he talked Rosenblum out of it. And then when it came time to bring a team back to Baltimore in 1953, he had to practically beg Rosenblum to do it. Of course, it was the greatest deal Rosenblum ever made. And basically, so they were friends. And actually, in Ocean City or Atlantic City, our home wasn't far from Rosenblum. So
Recording in progress.
So we were over there, and he was a lot of times. And basically, back to the ending there of your book, is that Rosenblum was a tremendous swimmer. He swam in the Atlantic Ocean. I would see him all the time over there. But bottom line, when my father dropped dead, and when we later found out, sadly 3 days later, that if he had lived long enough, that basically he would have been the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, and I probably would have been the spoiled brat having you in my box. So,
for our audience, just to elaborate a bit, Carl Rosenblum was the owner of the Baltimore Colts and later became the owner of the Los Angeles Rams, and as Upton said, a very complex character.
He was. By the way, guys, just quickly, it says this meeting is being recorded, but it's blocking part of the thing there. Is that anything?
No, we're clear on our end.
Do I have to hit continue or clear it? Or
You're coming through loud and clear, Upton.
okay, all right, that's fine. So
They want to hit continue.
basically,
Why don't you hit continue?
all right, hold on. Hit continue, Joanne. Okay. So what happened was that summer, 1960, and the Colts were coming off back-to-back world championships. And by the way, I was at the sudden death game in New York, which again, you guys bring up in the book. But Rosenblum called me over one day, and he said, Upton, come on in and sit down. And this is where I saw kind of the gambling. And he was playing a game with this guy that had a lot of money, and it was called Shut the Box. I don't know whether you guys ever heard of it. I talk about it a little bit in my book. And basically he said, Upton, I'm playing for you. And this Shut the Box, you roll the dice and all this other kind of complex stuff. And before I know it, he had beaten the colonel, his rich buddy, out of like $400 or $500 cash. He turned to me and he said, here, kid, take this.
And this is in the 50s, right, Upton? This one, $500 was $500. We're talking the 50s here?
Well, we're talking about 1960.
Wow.
Now today it won't buy you a hamburger. But while we were there on the screen, to show you that Rosenblum was really a kingmaker, on the screen is the Democratic National Convention, and it shows Senator Kennedy, who finally won the nomination, and then went on and had his speech at the Coliseum on the next day. But Rosenblum, who a lot of people didn't know, was very, very close to the Kennedys. He and Joe Kennedy were partners in a lot of things, including Georgia Rosenblum Frontiere. So basically, he's pointing out in the audience, and you see a young Ted Kennedy, and he said to me, Upton, JFK is going to be president, I think. He said, but the best politician and the greatest politician in the future will be Ted Kennedy.
But probably the worst swimmer.
Yeah.
Well, in fairness, Frank, if he drove a Volkswagen, he might have made it because Volkswagen's
And
float.
as it turned out, he was prophetic because Ted Kennedy was their greatest politician. And in spite of all his other problems, is considered by many people, myself included, as one of the great politicians of his time. Anyway, he said to me, Upton, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I think you should go to the Colt camp and start learning the business. And so I went that first summer in 1960 to the Colts camp. And I will tell you this, all of the kind of phony personalities today that promote their everything on Twitter, none of them could compare to Gino Marchetti, Big Daddy Lipscomb, who used to have to practice, do magic tricks for like 10, 15, 20,000 people. It's amazing. People just coming to practice. I mean, the Colts were Baltimore, they were Maryland, and they were the first real national team.
I think Artie Donovan was in that group also, wasn't he?
Artie Donovan, and you have to understand what it was like then. His father always came to training camp. Now, a lot of people don't know.
Art's
Artie,
father?
yes, you would know, Billy. His father refereed more championship fights than anybody in history.
Yes, that's exactly
Right?
right. He was big fight ref in Madison Square Garden. And of course, Donovan's nickname was Fatso, and he wrote a great book about him.
Fatso.
Fatso.
Yeah, he used to be on the Letterman show.
All the time.
And really, Art Donovan gave Billy the idea for this book when you met him in a bar in the Bronx.
Well, what happened up there is I grew up in the Bronx, and I went to the same grammar school and same high school as Art Donovan. Of course, he was a number of years ahead of me, maybe 8, 9 years ahead of me, but I went to school with his nephew. And when I came back from Vietnam in 1970, and of course, this was after the Colts got upset in '69 by the Jets, and I came back, and he said to me, "How'd you like to meet my Uncle Artie?" I says, this was like 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. And I says, wow, Art Donovan? Sure. Where is he? He's up in the idle hour having a few beers. And I blow in the door, and of course, Art Donovan, there's maybe 3 guys in the bar. It's only 10 o'clock in the morning. And Art Donovan's got his hand around those 15-cent, 7-ounce Pilsners, we used to get in the bars. And it looked like a shot glass in his hand, And he was ranting. Oh, we got screwed. I'm telling you right now, there's no way the Jets could have beat us that day. Rosenblum gave him our playbook. We got sold out. And I said, this is just, sour grapes from an old bitter man. And then I started doing a little research, and a lot of people feel there was something fugazi about that game.
Well, we can get to that because I can tell you that I can tell you didn't happen. It was a series of screw-ups. But let me go back.
Please.
To Donovan. You had Art Donovan, who everybody said could have been mayor of Baltimore. Gino Marchetti, one of the great characters, and became very, very rich when Rosenblum actually put him in business.
Gino's hamburger.
Everybody goes to Gino's. You had Big Daddy Lipscomb, who I will tell you, Frank, you would be doing a Jacksonville Who on this guy. Amazing and absolutely amazing character. Highly intelligent, never finished, barely finished high school. Sadly, he saw his mother stabbed to death.
Wow.
7 to 10 times in Detroit. Big Daddy's from Detroit. Pendleton Marines, never went to college, and basically the Rams signed him, as the Rams did. One of the greatest organizations in early football were the Rams. So you had Donovan, Big Daddy, Gino Marchetti, the $7 a week, who turned out to be the greatest quarterback, in my opinion, outside of Brady in history, John Unitas. Lenny Moore, the first guy to wear spats.
Spats was his nickname.
Spats was his nickname. Raymond Berry, the weirdest guy I ever met.
Wow.
I actually, the first day I was there, they sent me up to the locker room. They said, meet Fred Shue back there. I'll tell you what to do. We're going to have you hand out checks and stuff like that. I went in the locker room, and there's Big Daddy talking about penis size. Marchetti's kidding somebody else. And here's this guy over on the side, and you hear all these stories, you say it's a bunch of crap. Here's this guy washing his pants. And I said, who's this guy washing his pants? He said, it's Raymond Berry. I said, what the hell is he doing that for? And they said, because he does definitely have one leg shorter than another, but Raymond insists on washing all his clothes. I mean, this is after practice. And they introduced me to him. Then you had Alan the Horse Amici, who was one of the greats. Now, here's the interesting thing about, now think about it then, not today when everybody's a phony. He would play, he loved opera. So you would hear flowing at 10 o'clock at night, Pagliacci, all of the great opera stuff, and people would, scream out, "Horse, turn that crap off!" and he would sing out, "Oh, whatever." And I'm saying, I am in the middle. This is one of the greatest teams, by the way.
Without it.
Hey, can I ask you a question? Didn't the hero of our book, Lamar's Gamble, Lamar Hunt, didn't he play with Raymond Berry in college at TCU, was it? I thought we wrote that.
No, he did. And I'll tell you this, I know a lot about Lamar. I mean, that's why I love your book, because I know every character in it. And I know every lie told, and I know, and that's not bragging, it's just I was lucky enough to be at that time. And basically, I don't know if it's Raymond or who told me, I think that Raymond and Lamar were roommates.
Yes.
And it was either Raymond or somebody else told me the shyest person he ever met was Lamar Hunt. Hunt never told anybody at SMU that basically that he was H.L. Hunt's son. And you know what? To me, he was that way almost through the rest of his life. And very shy person.
And H.L. Hunt was the richest man in the world.
Absolutely. So
he was Bezos before Bezos.
Right. Less ego. So
less ego.
Lamar Hunt ain't going on any plane ride, as I call it, for 8 minutes and declaring he's emperor of the universe. So, when you see all these people, and the most unassuming person that I've ever met in football was John Unitas.
Really?
He was. I wrote my book. I was asked to pick between Brady and Unitas. I said two different eras, but you look at the man that invented the 2-minute offense, that put the NFL on the map with the greatest game ever played. Ice water in his veins. That everything about him, the checkoff, all the things that you see today. That was Unitas. When we would go on the road, and you guys are out in L.A., I remember we're taking a flight to L.A., and we get off the plane, and the Colts were the first, forget the Cowboys, America's faux team, and you look at the Colts of 58, 59, and going into 60. We get off the plane, and we're there, and everybody knew Unitas. They knew the Colts because of the sudden death game, and Clark Gable, who happened to be there. Now, for people today that that think who is it? Matt Damon's the greatest or something.
Clark Gable the king. That's what they all. That's all they have to say about him. The king.
He was the king. Gable walks all the way across and says to Unitas, "You're the first guy I ever asked for your autograph."
Wow.
And I mean, the players saw that. And it was just amazing. I mean, it was a Hollywood moment. Frank, I wish you met all these characters. You could add them onto your Jacksonville routine.
I know Billy O'Connor. That's a pretty good character.
Upton, I got to ask you real quickly. So Unitas was a walk-on. Is that correct? From Pittsburgh? Is that where he was from?
$7. Here's what happened. Somebody asked me the great what-ifs of history in the NFL. And I picked 3. One of them happened to be Pete Rozelle, which people forget, and probably could have gotten him fired if my father hadn't dropped dead. But But Pete Rozelle traded 9 players for Ollie Matson, who was near the end of his career with the Rams. That was one of them. The other one was, and I used to talk to Mr. Rooney. I still call him that, even though he's been dead for a long time. I always called him Mr. Rooney, even though he's my father's partner. If Art Rooney had stepped in, John Unitas would have been the leader of the Steelers, but they cut him. And he ended up playing for $7 a week with the Bloomfield Rams. And I remember one of the sons said later on, it might have been Danny, and said, you know what, we go see him play, and I'd say, I know we made a real mistake. But the only way, and again, I'm repeating how I feel about Hollywood show business, you got to be lucky. You got to be in the right place at the right time. This guy calls Don Kellett, the general manager of the Colts. And he said, I know you're looking for a quarterback. George Shaw has been hurt. In those days, he didn't have 50,000 backups for every quarterback. And he said, there's a guy playing here you might take a chance on. He was cut by the Steelers. He played at Louisville, and he was a pretty damn good quarterback. Luckily, Weave Eubank remembered him from Louisville because he knew Frank Camp, who was the coach there. And we took a chance. $7. I think we got him there, paid for his flight there, and he goes on to be, in my opinion, one of the 2 greatest quarterbacks that ever lived. But here is the thing that you learned about Unitas. He never forgot that he was the $7 a week quarterback with the Bloomfield Rams. At the height of his popularity, when everybody in America knew him, you would swear to yourself, that's the same kid that played for the Bloomfield Rams. It was just something. And I was asked about Unitas to compare him to Brady. And I said there are similarities. Brady went to Michigan, but he was, as we know, drafted so late and had a chip on his shoulder, still does today. I said, Unitas never had a chip on his shoulder. But I asked every one of our players, and I said, I was their age when I went there. Unlike most executives, I was 22 years old.
Whoa.
So when I was there, I could talk to players. I was part of management, but they weren't suspicious of me. And basically, the players said, I said, what's the difference between Unitas and every other quarterback? And there were a lot of great ones around there. And they said, he's a football player first and a quarterback second.
Whoa.
And I can tell you this, to give you an idea of what the game was like then versus now. Players bigger, quicker, faster, stronger, football smart, 55,000 assistant coaches, things in their ears. I mean, most of them don't call a play in their life, but they have all of that great ability. If you were on the sidelines then, which I was early on, and saw the physical beating that they took, and Unitas, he came in when there was no rule of roughing the passer.
Right.
You could literally, Frank and Billy, you could literally name someone, and yet he stood in the pocket, and to complete the pass, I can't tell you what it was like. I can't explain. Even today, with all the cameras on the sideline, they don't get what it's like. 2 armies clashing in the 16th century, and you're lucky if you survive it.
Yeah.
And I used to even, and I'm used to it. I was around football. I was around my father. I know the beatings you took. In fact, my father, all the way through to the end of his life, never had any teeth. They were all knocked out at 10.
Wow.
No teeth. And to see this, and Unitas would get up, and there's a famous play that I talk about in my book, where Unitas, it was the Bears, when they had those great teams, and you had Doug Atkins, 6'9", an absolute hitman. And when they would come in, because he knew how tough Unitas was. They knee him, they hit him in the ribs, they hit him in the head, everything but kicking. And basically, he was bleeding badly, and he was lying on the ground. And the official came over, which is rare, and said, I'll give you the extra time, whatever you need, John. Now, I hope this isn't a family program.
No.
But if
No,
it is,
please feel free.
Our host, my co-host is Billy O'Connor. It's not
We're
a
big on the
family
First
show.
Amendment here, Upton. Very big on the First Amendment.
Unitas said, fuck you. He said, I'm getting up. He got up. Next play, threw a 60-yard touchdown pass. We beat the Bears and walk off the field.
So let me ask you about the 58 greatest game ever played. Allegedly, Rosenblum had a bet on that game. And they got the sudden death overtime, and the Colts got down to the 8-yard line. Most teams would have kicked a field goal because they would have won the game. Unitas went for it, and they got down to the 2-yard line. And again, they denied the field goal, and they gave it to
The horse.
the horse.
Lenny Moore.
No.
Yeah, they gave it to Michi and Moore through
Yeah.
which was a key block.
Yes.
Yes.
Lenny Moore did.
And the Colts won by 7.
6.
6, because they didn't kick the extra point at
Right.
that time. And do you think what do you think the spread had to do with it and Rosenblum's alleged bet on the game?
I don't think any. An understanding, I'm cynical enough to know what happened, later on during Rosenblum's years with the Colts. A couple of reasons why. Number one, they loved Steve Myler. They used to call him Mumbles. Steve, get in there. Mumbles, get the hell in there. Unitas knew everybody. And they were even nervous when he drove them down to the 20-yard line, I think 17, 20-yard line, and sent him in to kick the tying field goal. And they were all nervous he was going to miss it. They never were really sure what Mumbles might do. So in that case, Unitas, who was really smart, he really knew people. He knew players. He was like a coach. And the fear was that, first of all, you got to understand, Unitas was the first and the most unorthodox player I've ever been around. He would never do, there was a game plan. Reed Eubank let him run that game plan, unlike today where they tell you everything. And basically he knew, and in the back of his mind, without letting the players know, that let's take it in because you never know what Mumbles is going to do. Now, I will tell you this, and one of the people who is in my collection was a real character, a Baltimore writer, right out of the movie Diner, believe me, and there were characters all over in Baltimore. He had talked about that Rosenblum that week had put a spy in a room overlooking the Giants' practice field to see what they were doing. Nobody could ever prove it, but he claims that that's the story that happened with that. But basically, whether he had a bet on the game, the other part of it that I was telling Frank the other day, a lot of people don't know. And like Inside Hollywood, I want to give you all the scoops.
Okay.
All right.
So,
And you can tell a hell of a story too, Upton, so
yeah,
feel free,
well,
brother.
So what happened was Ed Sullivan, who was the kingmaker, and Amici appeared that night, as we know, and the only reason Amici came on the Ed Sullivan show, if you got to do something on the Ed Sullivan show, you could become the Queen of England. I mean, you were it. That was it at that time. And Unitas was named the MVP, and they said, you want to go to the show? We'd like to have you on. I said, this is why, again, I love people like that. He said, I'm going back with my teammates. I don't give a damn about the Ed Sullivan show. Send the horse. He scored the winning touchdown. And so basically, Sullivan had written in his column, because he also had one of the biggest columns.
Toast of the town.
Yeah, talk of the town. And so he wrote, was there a bet on the game? Why did Unitas do it? And by the way, in the locker room after the game, everybody was around Unitas. Why did you, same thing that you guys are asking, why did you do this? And he said, if you know what the hell you're doing, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
And that was Unitas, right? Always in character. So basically, Sullivan wrote a whole thing about it.
About the gambling. About the gambling and the bet.
Yeah, about the gambling and the bet on the game. Luckily for me, and why I'm lucky enough to be a witness to history, going all the way back even into the 40s, early 40s, is I heard all my father's telephone conversations. There are 3 phones in the house. There was one that he was on constantly, even at, I'd have to wake him at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and said, they're calling from the West Coast. Want me to tell them you're not here? He said, don't you ever tell anybody I'm not here. So he had the phone for all sorts of business. There was a phone on the landing for his kids, not that we ever could get the hell on it. There was a 3rd phone. Now we're back to gambling for a minute. And it was like a red phone. And on that phone, I was told, don't ever answer. And I hear that phone ring all week long. And then on Sunday, it became really important. On that phone were 3 characters, right out again, Hollywood. Hockey, Wingy, and Frisco Legs.
I love it.
Now, what happened was, and we're jumping all around, in 1946, there's the gambling scandal the night before the game of Bert Bell's first year. Frank Hogan, the district attorney, calls and said, Mr. Bell, you better get here to New York. He had planned to come the next day for the game. He said, we have a report of a bribe that wasn't turned in by Frank Filchak and Merrill Hapes. And he said, basically, we've got to do something about this. They brought them both in. I thought they're going to be arrested. And my father settled it, made a big announcement to the media, and which I think really saved the game. He saved the game many times, but that did, because he said, we won't tolerate any of this. I'm suspending one, and the other one, Frank Filchak, I'm going to let play in the game. And eventually, in the end, sent them to Canada. He banned them from football. Now, what did he do next? He called his former quarterback, who figures in your book, gentlemen, Davey O'Brien, who was the first quarterback that my father ever insured with Lloyd's of London. He was not very big, but he's tremendous. He had left early in pro football to join the FBI and became the greatest single pistol shot in America. Knew J. Edgar Hoover. My father called him, said, talk to J. Edgar Hoover. I want all ex-FBI men in every city in the NFL, and I want them to report to me any suspicious thing among players, gamblers, whatever it is. He's the first guy to hire ex-FBI men to be in every major league city. Today, now they pay them $1 million and they report nothing, or they pretend like they do. So that was kind of the beginning of it. But now we jump to the championship game. And so I'm listening to my father on the phone, and he said, I want to let he got a lawyer. Naturally, the league had plenty of lawyers. And he said, I want to let Ed Sullivan know, if I don't get a retraction, I'm suing him. And I'm going to make it public. And I'm going to make him prove that what he put in there was the truth. Yeah. And it's the only time that he ever got somebody to retract something. It's the only time Sullivan ever did. And by the end of the week, he had retracted the story.
Wow.
Wow.
So when you were
the great thing about Bert Bell, you guys would have loved him. He was afraid of no one. The reason that no commissioner will ever have his power again is he was a player, he was a coach, he was an owner. He was one of them.
And he started.
So if he wanted,
he started the draft, right?
Yes, oh yeah. Well, I won't get to that. But
Good.
he actually would be able to go into a league meeting and say, you don't like it, too bad. And he knew how to be political, but he was one of them, which gets me to the point of, like everything else that you guys know, you deal with a lot of powerful people, is that basically in the NFL, and really true about life, you're either an owner or a renter. And basically, if you're not an owner, whether you're Upton.Bell working for a club or a player or anybody else, you have no power.
Wow.
So he was able to deal with them in a different way. No commissioner has ever been able to do it. So basically, he got Sullivan to back down. He then put in a situation with all sorts of FBI, ex-FBI guys around. Now, the other thing, going back to the phone, is that here's what he would do. He would start on Sunday right after the game. He would go immediately home, and he'd get on the phone, and he would call these people or have them call him. He would get the early line on every team on every game. And then every day that week, leading right up to game time. I remember a couple of times when they would report a flux in the point spread, that he would actually get on the phone and call into the damn locker room and say, I don't know what's going on here. Is one of your players hurt? Have you reported it? Is anybody sick here? And they would tell him, well, yeah, so and so, and immediately would tell him, we've got to announce that. So what you see today, again, was one of the things that Bert Bell put in, which was basically he made every club within 48 to 72 hours before the game, you had to come out on the waiver wire and declare who was injured and who was probable. That was, let me see, how many years ago? About 80 years ago. Think about that.
Brilliant foresight. Brilliant. He was the first guy to come up with follow the money. Follow the money. If the money's in there, the line's moving. Why?
Well, here's the thing, guys. He knew, and here's the thing about experience, is that Bert Bell's father was one of the richest people in Philadelphia, owned the Ritz-Carlton, where the first draft was held in 1936. His father was one of the landowners in Philadelphia. His father was also the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, and also his father in 1885 was an All-American when they played with no helmets. He later founded the NCAA. He negotiated with Teddy Roosevelt when Roosevelt was going to cut out college football, and he was part of that of the Walter Camp Committee that actually went in and negotiated with Teddy Roosevelt. So that was going all the way back. But his son Bert, after Penn, after playing there, coached at Penn, then coached at Temple, but he also ran with people. In those days, you can't do it today. Gangsters, killers, show business people, football people, everybody knew each other. They weren't connecting on what we have today. They knew everybody. So basically, here's how Art Rooney got in and Bert Bell got into the NFL. They used to go in those days to Saratoga Racetrack, and there was a great gambling casino, which is still there. And what they would do is they'd all meet. Cesar Romero, wow. Bert Bell, Art Rooney, all of them.
Probably Wellington Marriott also.
Oh, well, I don't think Wellington, Tim Marriott might have, because
Tim.
he was a legitimate bookmaker.
Right.
But what happened was, this one night, this story not told by me, this is told by somebody else. Bert Bell went in, I think he lost $50,000 or $100,000. And so he said, can I pay you by check? Because you're going to have to go to his father. And the head of the casino said, we take cash only. So he said to himself, I'm sure I'll fix that son of a bitch. So he went back the next night and won it all back. And when they came to him and said, will you take a check, Mr. Bell? He said, I take cash only.
Good for him. Terrific.
And took the money and walked out. But he and his father was big on college football. And that's where he was convinced by Marshall and other people get into the NFL. And basically, he thought about it in 1920, but decided to back off because of the Black Sox scandal. So eventually, that's how they met. Now, Peyton Manning, which I didn't know about till somebody called me, did a special on ESPN this past year with a guy from Philadelphia who does the stock reports. I think it's on not MSNBC, but CNBC.
It's that wild guy. I don't remember his name.
And so he basically, Manning's talking to this guy, and he said, I'm a big Philly fan. He said, let me tell you about Bert Bell. He said, the day of the crash, Bert Bell lost $50,000 in the market. And went back and told his father he lost it, and he wanted to buy an NFL team. And later on, that team, of course, became the Philadelphia Eagles, and he bought them out of bankruptcy. But all these different things that flow through it come back to it. I know you're again, as you talk in the book about gambling, how it drives it. But everybody then, it was pretty legitimate until Rosenblum really came in and all the accusations came. I knew Tim Mara and I knew Wellington. Tim Mara was, like it or not, a legitimate bookmaker. Art Rooney, who later on was my father's partner with the Steelers, he actually won. The reason the Steelers are here today, and they were originally called the Pittsburgh Pirates, is that Rooney actually went to the racetrack and won $40,000 or $50,000 that day and took the money and bought a football team. And he had a stable after that his horses never did anything. And I just can't understand those guys. I asked him one day, well, Mr. Rooney, your horses don't win a lot. Why do you do it? He said, because I love being around jockeys and the people around the track. He said, Upton, they're real people. So I'm trying to give you a view of people then, whatever their sins might be, they didn't like phonies. They liked real people. They didn't sign contracts. The players did. It was a handshake. And if you went back on your handshake, now you might find yourself in an alley someplace.
Two behind the ear. Take two behind the ear and end up in the trunk of a car.
Yeah.
Well, they were certainly.
I know a few of them too.
Well, they certainly were the greatest generation for a reason. They were just made out of different cloth than we are. Like tough men, hard men, and I think they take pride in being called hard men. That was a tremendous compliment to people of that era.
Well, let's get back to Carroll Rosenblum. So at 21, 22, you were with the Colts, and Carroll gave you a rather unique assignment, didn't he, Mr. Beard?
Well, yeah. As I talk about in the book, I've seen every side of life, good, bad, indifferent, seamy, you name it. And most of it happened in leading up to answering your question, Frank. Most of it happened by accident. I'm a great believer that I am the natural descendant of Forrest Gump, and a little bit of Woody Allen Zelig. I just happened to be either in the right or wrong place at the right time. And so when I first came to the Colts, and I initially worked in the ticket office, and then a lot of other areas before I really got into scouting. And everybody on the team knew Carol was seeing Georgia. Ended up being, her name was originally Georgia Hayes. And she was introduced to Carol by Joe Kennedy. And
yeah, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And so he would say to me, I and my brother were the only single people on the team. And he said, I want you to go out to the airport, Friendship Airport, and meet this person. And I want you to drive her to the Sheraton Belvedere at that time and have dinner. And then I'll show up and basically I'm paraphrasing, and you can beat it.
And he was married at the time, correct?
Yes, and really the difficult thing is I loved his wife. She was Dolly Rosenblum. You would love her. She's a very attractive, kind of wonderful, more home type of person. And basically, it was very difficult. It was a young man, boy, trying to deal with a moral situation. And on one hand, if I'd said no, what's going to happen? It's going to say, kid, see you later. If I say yes, I've made the deal with the devil. And so I said, yes, I will do it. So I would meet her at the airport, and I would drive her in, and we'd have dinner, and then he would show up. And everybody knew, the guy that ran the hotel, everybody was in on the deal. It's Baltimore. It's a different life.
What was she like, Upton? Was she charismatic? Was she, besides beautiful, was she interesting? Was she affable? What do you feel about George?
You know what? I'm partially think about evil, and then I partially think about there's two sides, maybe three to all of us. I actually liked her. Because she number one at that time, she was really desperate. Carol promised her everything. He's going to leave his wife, all of these other things. And I know she used to call a friend of mine and say, you know what, he should hurt me again. It's just never going to happen. But she was smart. She was bright. She was a very good looking woman. And that part I really liked.
Could you use the word?
We had after the game, see, and it was great. I worked in the ticket office. I once said, "Why do I ever want to get promoted? This is the greatest life I know." I said I drive her to New York after the games, but my other job at the ticket office was Rosenblum would call and say, "Take the Colts station wagon. I need 5 footballs and a pair of sneakers, and I want you to take them over to the White House." I said, okay.
What a job.
Well, so I say, why, Mr. Rosenblum? He said, because we have a touch football on the lawn. The president will be there, and he loved that. So there I was, White House gate, Mr. Bell, dropped the sneakers off, all the other stuff. Go to dinner that night, whatever it was, come back. I said, life couldn't be this good.
So Forrest Gump again. I want to.
Yeah, we'll go again. And after the games, I would drive Georgia to New York. And it's interesting. She wasn't a great singer, but that's how she started out as a singer. And
chorus girl, I believe.
Carol would pay for her to have a session, which had to be like to the studio and everything else, $20,000-$30,000.
Wow.
And I would do it, and then I'd say goodbye and drive back to Baltimore again. But it gave me an insight into her, and only as we went through things and got to the very end, there was another part. But I'm always looking at people and how they survive and what happens. But she was around. I will never forget this. In the year that we lost to the Jets, we won the NFL championship in Cleveland, beat them 34-0. But before the game, she had walked out on the field. The divorce was through by then, and she walked out with Carol, and she always knew what to say. And she said to me, Upton, Carol and I were talking, and she said, your father would be so proud of you today, because it was my drafts. I was the young kind of personnel director who drafted all these players, and a lot of them were part of this championship game. And she knew what to say, because certainly, don't you feel good if somebody says, your father's looking down on you today? how many actors or actresses do you have to massage in Hollywood? Oh, you're the greatest, and you know they're not. So,
but you did it. You actually put together that draft, and that was one hell of a
I did.
But they lose
I
one
did.
game in 2 years. I mean,
Yeah, no, the Super Bowl team finally that we won in 70, 17 of my players I drafted were on that team. And so it was an interesting thing. And even going back on Rosenblum and all the things about him that I did or didn't like, I go back to two things. One, he's the only person. Because Eagles were being sold. They didn't go to Bert Bell because he had dropped dead. New group was coming in. And there's one thing I'm very realistic about. When somebody is gone that's powerful, you better get going, babe, because nobody's going to take care of you.
Yep.
And he did. The second thing was, at the age of 25, I had been working in the scouting department. I'd left the ticket department. And basically, Shula came in, and the personnel director I was working for, Keith Molesworth, who was actually the first coach of the Colts, had dropped dead. Here we go again. And so I was in Dallas. I drove all the way back, and I remember saying, I better go in and talk to Shula, who was really running everything and could be very tough. And I knew that he had a guy by the name of Bob Nussbaumer in Detroit, who he respected a lot, was their personnel guy, had played at the Redskins, pretty good player. And I said, there's no way I'm going to get this job. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to say to him, which I did. I said, I know you have friends out there, and I know you're looking at somebody, but I'm going to tell you this. I'm going to get this job. I'm going to show you that I can do this, and I'm going to make it difficult so you don't pick somebody else. I think he was kind of taken back by it. And the other thing I did is I wrote a letter to Rosenblum and reminded him, you were one of 7 children. You were the youngest, yet you're the one that your father chose to run Blue Ridge Manufacturing. He gave you the money and the authority. You were just a young guy. I said, I'm a young guy like you. I said, you need to take a chance on me. I guarantee you'll never be sorry. Figure I never hear back from him. 3 weeks later, Shula called me in and said, I've chosen you. Gamble.
Yep.
Yeah.
Take a chance in life.
Yep.
Don't be afraid to say things and challenge people. And that's how I don't think I would have ever gotten the job. Nobody had, most of the personnel directors and the scouts were, 50, 60 years old. You didn't get a job until you were near death. And so here's somebody that's, eventually 26 years old, 27, that took over with one of the major teams in football.
That's remarkable. Shula also said about your dad that he saved the game with the parody, that it was your dad that saved the game by making parody.
Well, the title of his book is On Any Given Sunday. Bert Bell invented that term. There's 2 things that he did. And Arthur Daly, the famous writer, Hall of Fame writer for the New York Times, wrote, if Bert Bell did nothing else, his monument is the pro football draft. And basically he saw, and I have to tell you, I've been around a lot of smart, intelligent people. Nobody like him. He saw the future. He saw television. He saw that, and he went to the owners and he said, I have the worst team in the league. He said, but we're only as strong as our weakest link. And if we, let me propose something, a draft. And he said, with the weakest teams going first and down the line. He said, now I know George Hallis, you, Curly Lambeau, you, the Bears, the Green Bay Packers, and the New York Giants dominated football. And he said, we won't have any league to play in. And Frank, you know a little bit about not being in a league where we no longer play in it. But basically, from the time of 1920 to the time of 1935, 30 teams went out of business in the NFL.
Yep.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks, these are the original teams, everything happened. It's BS. They didn't. They went out of business, and Bert Bell saw that. And he finally convinced Hallis, who was the power, for the first pro football draft. Held, because nobody had any money, held at his father's hotel in Philadelphia on Broad Street. And in 1936, blackboard going in, cocktails for everybody. Nobody had a scouting manual. All they had were newspapers and calling out to coaches. No computers, no tests, no nothing. The first draft, which I think won 14 rounds, without any of the crap that you have today, produced 3 Hall of Fame players, and the fourth one was Bear Bryant.
Wow.
Who turned it down. The first player taken, Jay Berlinger, the minute he heard Bert Bell drafted him, he quit. and he sent him, he traded him to Hallis because he's from Chicago. He's the Heisman Trophy winner, and Hallis never was able to sign him. That first draft, nobody came. 2 weeks later, they finally announced it. The press could care less. Today, they're selling it for $1 million, and it's the second biggest TV thing to the Super Bowl.
Wow.
That's great.
Amazing, right?
Bert Bell's dream did that. The other thing is that, you think about Bobby Fischer, you think about the great chess masters. And Bert Bell used the game of chess to make up the schedule. And I remember, he really did work 24 hours a day. That's why he was dead young.
He made the schedule up on your kitchen table, didn't he?
On the kitchen table. And the way it was, finally he took it to a drawing room and closed himself off from all of us. And on that was these pieces, like a chess game. And he would actually have the teams going down and then the dates going across. And in those days, because you had to share with stadiums, he had to also figure in the third aspect was most of them were baseball stadiums, so you couldn't go in to play this and
right.
that. So I remember one day him saying that basically he had gotten a call from a writer, it might have been from the Associated Press. They said, well, Mr. Bell, what are you going to do about this and that? And he said, I'm trying to make it up so at that time there were 12 teams that by mid-season every team would be in the race. This is where Roselle picked it up. And they said, well, how would you determine it? And he said, I want it so on any given Sunday, any team can beat any other team. I hear that still today.
Yeah,
and
that coin
again,
yep.
If I'd been smart enough, I would have had that whole thing and sold it to the highest bidder. Now everybody uses it. And basically, that's how he explained it. But you would watch him. He would work all day at the office. He'd come home, take off his suit, put on a gray sweatshirt, go into this room before dinner, and just play with these things. I watch it, and I remember I once interviewed Bobby Fischer, and I was saying, what the hell's the difference? I was watching what he did and how he moved them around, and then he'd see, oh, I've got a problem here. The game's being played, baseball is still there. I've got to move it there. But how can I also get it where everybody by mid-season is still in the race? I want the weak to be right where the strong are.
Brilliant. That kind of foresight, really. But you mentioned before that how many football teams that went out of business, and of course there was no money in pro football at the time. So for people to buy a team, you'd almost have to be a gambler, not just an entrepreneur. You'd have to have that gambling nature.
You had to have enough money, and in his case, and again, which will now go to Frank and myself in the World Football League, is that basically when he put up his money, he actually got it from my mother, who was a Ziegfeld Folly star, was engaged at that time to Bernard Baruch's son,
Whoa.
the richest man in America. And she was Catholic, he was Jewish, and finally she met my father at a party for Charles Lindbergh. She knew Lindbergh in those days, they knew each other. And she said to him, first of all, I said, "Oh, honey, I'd like to date you." And she said, "I don't date drunks." So, so she said, "Forget college football. The pro game is it." She said, "Do you ever see the Bears? Do you ever see this and that?" Finally, they kind of got together, and he would bring her to Philadelphia, and they'd go to Penn games and stuff like that. But she was the one, and I've always claimed that Frances Upton belongs in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, because if she hadn't given him the money to buy the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets out of bankruptcy, there would be no NFL today. And the reason I say is because of that, because of all the losses, and him recommending the draft and getting pushed through. There was no draft, there'd be no NFL. We'd be talking about something else.
Well,
And so she put the money up. She encouraged him to get in the game. She did, and I asked her one time, I said, "Why would you be foolish enough to give up all that money as one of the most powerful people in America? You were picked as one of the most beautiful women in America. Why would you take Bert Bell, who owed everybody?" We've actually found love letters. And I never pictured my father ever writing a love letter. The only thing I picture him doing is writing a check. And, and so we found lover letters to her basically saying, "I have no money and my father isn't going to give me any more money." I asked my mother, I said, "Why would you ever do it?" And this is an interesting answer. She said, "I had a feeling about your father." And she wasn't talking about a sexual feeling or something. She said, "I just had a feeling about your father. There was something there that I really saw that I didn't necessarily see in this multimillionaire." And she said, "I knew the type of life that I might be in for," which is basically, at that time she had decided to quit the stage to marry him. She said, I was taking a chance, but she said, "I had that feeling." And I'm saying to myself, one of the great gambles in history. And actually a great gamble, the late picking Bert Bell.
Yes.
But before your mom took that gamble, she made your father make her a promise, correct?
She did. He called her again. I see the movie here. He's in Atlantic City with all his buddies, drinking, gambling buddies, and everything else like that. And there's a place called the Knife and Fork, which is still there. And he calls and he said, "Frances, I'm in love. All my friends are here. I want you to know that I want to marry you." And she said, "Bert, I've told you before, I don't marry drinkers. I don't marry drunks." He said, "Well, I'm here to tell you," this is like 1933, "if you marry me, I will never take a drink the rest of my life." Everybody in the background's laughing. She said, "All right, I'll give you a chance. I'll give you 6 months. I'll give you a year." From that day on, he never took a drink the rest of his life. Nothing. Cold turkey. There was never any liquor at our house. A lot of laughter, a lot of fun, great characters. Never liquor in the house. Never.
Well, speaking of great characters, your mom had quite a friendship with Al Capone, didn't she?
Her life, yeah. Her life, Frank, was really amazing. I mean, I was lucky enough to be in between two people that were, really bigger than life, and yet really human. She had been discovered in New York. Billy, you're from New York. She was discovered in Macy's working in the behind the perfume counter. She was still in high school. And one of the Schubert Theater talent scouts had come through there to buy perfume, and he said, "You're a very beautiful young girl." He said, "Do you have any show business experience?" She said, "Well, I'm in high school." And basically she said, I take ballet, but that's it. He said, well, here's my card. If you ever think about it, give me a call. 4 years later, she was a star on Broadway. 4 years later. I mean, her story is as amazing, if not more so than him, because basically her father, and I've told Frank some of this, Billy, her father was one of 11 children. His father was a person by the name of William Cleary Upton. He wrote a book called Uncle Pat's Cabin, based upon Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. It's about the tenant farmers in Ireland and how they were treated.
Whoa.
And basically, you can get that book on Amazon today, 130 or 40 years later. It's still one of the most profound books. It's written in Gaelic. And he was thrown out of Ireland because he and a group tried to blow up a British police station. They drove him out of Ireland, came to New York, had 11 children, and one of them was Frank Upton, my mother's father, who got a job on the police force, never finished high school, but he spoke 6 foreign languages.
Whoa.
And the only reason that they hired him, because Billy, you know this in New York, not now, but then, no Irish need apply.
Sure.
There ain't no way he's going to get that job. But what happens is that they test him and they say, all right, in those days, you had the Black Hand, which was really the mafia.
Right.
You had the German section. You had the Irish section. All these different sections. So they sent him in as an undercover cop because he could speak the languages. And so my mother would tell me that he would come home after weeks. They wouldn't see him, disguised. And one time they locked him out. Then they realized he was their father. But he became, he broke one of the big murder cases in New York. He also, at the age of 41, volunteered for the First World War and went to the First World War, only survived. They never heard from him for over 2 years. The New York Times wrote a story on it.
At 41, he went.
Yeah.
Amazing.
These people don't want to go at 21. So what he did was he survived because the Germans used him as an interpreter to talk to all of the different people that they had captured. He finally came back after 2 years and had an incredible career. So, I mean, that whole other side was famous. In some ways, Frances Upton was more famous than Bert Bell.
For sure. And then she introduced Eddie Cantor's song, Making Whoopee.
She did, and she was, Flo Ziegfeld said she had the most beautiful legs on Broadway, and basically, she did, not only that, Ruth Etting, and that's back to what you're asking, Frank, about Al Capone. Ruth Etting and she were very, very close, and they were on the road together because they were in shows together. And of course, I don't know whether your audience would remember, but they ought to go get the movie because there was a great movie called Love Me or Leave Me with Doris Day and Jimmy Cagney, who played Moe the Gimp Snyder. And it was about Ruth Etting and their doomed romance. And basically, my mother and Ruth Etting on the road together, Moe the Gimp Snyder, they both lived when they were on the road with pistols under their pillows because they were concerned Moe would get very jealous and come in and blow people up in the room. So Moe says, I'm going to take you. We're going to meet a good friend of mine, Al Capone. My mother, who was somewhat naive, she was very, mature for somebody that age. She was only, a kid, 23, 24. So they end up going to, and he said, you might meet Machine Gun Ned McGurn. So I said to my mother, what the hell, why'd you go? She said, because you did it in those days. So they went there, and she's kind of sitting across from Capone, and she notices that Capone and all of his cronies are sitting with their backs to the wall, and my mother and Ruth Etting are sitting with their backs to the door.
The Wild Bill Hickok syndrome.
Yeah, so she says, "Oh, Mr. Capone, why are we all sitting on one side and you're sitting on the other?" And Edding kicks her and says, "Because we're going to get shot first."
So why don't we jump ahead to your taking over the New England Patriots?
Well, that's another movie. I knew. The Rosenblum had said to me, "Look, Upton, they have like 5 or 10 owners. They're going into a new stadium. It might be a good thing for you. You're only 32 years old. How many people get that opportunity to do it? You built everything here." And so basically, against the advice of some other owners that said, "You're stepping into a cauldron." But when you're 32, as you guys know, you think the world is your oyster. Well, the world, the minute I got off the plane, I knew I crossed the river Styx and headed into Dante's Inferno, because I picked up the paper before I went in for my press conference, and it has the BS Patriots moved to Foxborough. And Billy Sullivan, who everybody kind of, looked at as a clown here, but basically, they were kind of making fun of him, but also the Bay State Patriots, because they were changing the name. They had decided stupidly, instead of keeping it as the Boston Patriots, to make it into the Bay State Patriots. And I thought, oh my God, we got to get rid of this name. By the way, getting a little ahead of myself, I convinced them to call them the New England Patriots, so we wouldn't be made fun of, and basically we'd be a draw for the 6 New England states. But at my first press conference, I'm getting up and talking about I'm looking forward to change it and we'll get younger and everything else. And the first question is, "Mr. Bell, why would somebody from one of the most successful organizations of pro football history come to the worst organization?" So I said, I forget what my answer was, but that was just the beginning of what was an incredible story. Fights among owners, to Dom DiMaggio, Joe's brother, who had become very wealthy, bought part of the Patriots, but then dumped out when he thought the books were being shuffled, and sold it to 2 guys, Wettenhall and McConnell, one the Avon heir, who operated out of New York and were trying to always kill the owners here. So I was constantly in the middle of all of it, but able to finally, I hired Bucko Kilray from the Dallas Cowboys, Peter Hathazy from the league office, hired scouts, hired a lot of good people. All of them went on to head jobs around the league, but there was no way that I was going to be able to survive all of the infighting, the problems. Actually, one of the great scenes, and we're on the 50th anniversary of it, and they've called me about it, is the opening night of the new stadium, which when they brought a person in to run the stadium, said to me, "Upton, keep it to yourself. The stadium was just finished and it's already obsolete." I'm going like,
Good God.
We've got to open up here. And so through a series, the toilets wouldn't flush. The stadium was at the highest point in Foxborough, so the water couldn't run uphill. They even had a thing that's on NBC somewhere called Super Flush, where the owners and myself and other people had to come in and at the 1, 2, 3 the day before the game on the loudspeaker system, they yelled "flush." We had to do it at the same time. The Board of Health closed us down.
Whoa.
The opening game, when you get off the super highway, you get on to Route 1 leading to Foxborough. And I remember saying, this is a potential traffic jam. Opening night, 1971, we're playing the New York Giants, great rivalry then. And I remember before the game, walking up to the top of the stadium over the press box and looking down, I said, my God, the Roman legions are coming And believe me, they're not all going to be able to get here. And so by game time, half the people had not arrived because it was the largest traffic jam in Massachusetts history. And cars on fire. I mean, you have never seen anything like this. And this dummy gets up and on the loudspeaker system, because everybody's asking questions, what the hell is going on here? And he says, don't worry about it. Just a few people observing what's going on here. Just a few observers getting in the way of the traffic. You couldn't believe it. There are still the leftover bones of those cars out there. So that was my introduction to that. After that, the Board of Health closed us down. We had to go to the Department of Public Works. Every game had to be changed from a preseason game from a night game to a day game. And typical of everybody in the NFL, they always want to take care. They always want to take advantage of you if they think you're in a weakened situation. And so the Rams called, we were due to play them, and they said, we'll agree to play during the day if you give us a draft choice.
Unbelievable.
I said, go screw yourself. But that, there were things, incredible things that happened one after the other. And finally, in the end, I wanted to fire the coach because I felt he wasn't the future. We had some great upsets that first year. We beat the Dolphins. We beat the Raiders. We actually beat a lot of good teams, but I could see the coach wasn't the coach for the future. I got in an argument with the owners. I said, you can't do it. And so finally, after almost 2 years, there was just no way that was going to work. Luckily for me, the people I hired went on to really terrific jobs. But the lesson learned is you just can't turn around an impossible situation. No matter how young you are, no matter how talented you are, if the owners decide this is what they're going to do, you have no chance.
Yeah.
So that was about the time of the AFL and the NFL merger, and merger was taking place in 66 or 67 or so, but around 1970, 71, 72, they started to play the interleague schedule. Why don't you tell us a little about Lamar Hunt, who was the hero of our book, and also the relationship between Pete Rozelle and Al Davis?
Well, and I knew all of them, and that's why I hope people really read your book, because whether you have to cover it up with satire, call it faction, whatever else it is, pretty much all of the facts are true, and people really need to learn what the NFL today was not what the NFL could have been, might have been, might not have been. And in 1959, the last year my father was alive, actually months before he died, Lamar Hunt wanted to buy the St. Louis Cardinals. And my father had told Hunt that basically, he said, there's still teams in the red. He said, if you'll be patient, he said, eventually, I think you'll be able to do it. But right now, he said, I'm not necessarily in favor of it because we've got too many teams still losing money. So Hunt really wasn't, in the end, satisfied by that. So he comes back in from earlier in our conversation, Bert Bell's quarterback, his friend from the FBI, Davey O'Brien. So Lamar Hunt sent Davey to Margate, New Jersey, where we had a summer home. And I remember the different meetings and everything else like that. And basically, Davey was the go-between. And my father told Davey to go back and tell Lamar that he just didn't think he could do it right now. But then there were meetings. I always had to laugh because my father said that to Davey, tell Lamar, come to Margate and I'll take him to the Stewart Club. So Hunt, arrives, suit, tie, everything else like that. My father's, just in a, kind of a normal shirt and a pair of brown pants. And he said, come on, we're going to Stewart Club. Stewart Club was a delicatessen. And here they are sitting, Lamar, and because that's who my father was, down to earth. He and his family were the biggest family in Philadelphia. He was well known ever as commissioner of football, and yet, there were no airs about him. So here they are in this delicatessen, French fries and roast beef, talking about one of the biggest deals that end up in football history. And so he told Lamar, he just said, I just don't think we can do it right now. And it was through Lamar and Davey that said, basically, would you be interested in being, if we have another league, commissioner of both leagues? And he said, I just don't think I can do it. Now, here's another fact that nobody knows. I think it was 1947, 48, when people saw how good Bert Bell was a commissioner of the NFL and over a lot of sports. He was approached by Major League Baseball. And they asked him would he be interested in being the commissioner of baseball and football at the same time. Nobody knows that story. I know the story because I heard it on him turning it down on the telephone. Again, I'm lucky enough to be witness to history because I heard all the conversations on the telephone. So basically, he said, I can't be commissioner of your league and I can't be of both leagues. He said, but basically, if you're going to go ahead with it, he said, let me announce it to Congress. He said, and I'm telling you, when Bert Bell tells you this, it's not some BSer you hear today. He said, I'll be happy to help your league. He said, the competition would be good for us. And I think that Lamar basically thought, well, maybe someday, here we go, gentlemen, someday there's going to be a game between the two leagues. And he proposed that. So all of that's back in 1959.
Yeah.
Which, again, didn't happen until almost 10 years later.
Didn't you say that after that happened, Lamar went to see Bud Adams, but Lamar, your brother or something, or Lamar's brother had to make the call because Lamar was too shy?
Well, actually, there was a meeting, came to Philadelphia, and there was a meeting in a place called the Tavern. And it was Lamar, my father, and my brother Bert. And I remember discussing with them right afterwards. And they must have sat there for like 20 minutes. And again, going back to Lamar was shy. And my father finally said to him, well, Lamar, why did you come? What do you want? This is after the meetings in Atlantic City. Now, there was only one in Atlantic City. But finally, he just said, well, I still want to talk about this and about that. Ironically, less than a month later, my father was dead. Wow. And I always said this, Frank and Billy, if he had lived, I think you'd have seen a different situation. I don't think you'd have seen a bitter war. Because when a guy like Hallis, and he was close to everybody. I mean, every day he called every owner in the league. I heard the conversation. Because when he'd come home for dinner, my mother would be on one end discussing show business or Bert or Upton Janie, I don't like your manners, take your hands off the table. And my father would be at the other end eating his food, but on the other hand, with the phone in his ear. Now, you would say today, that's really ignorant. But different time. He'd be in his ear talking to his people about what is going on. But I think, knowing him, that he could have said to Hallis and these other people, look, I'm going to go to Congress. I'm going to announce it. Because Emmanuel Seller, who you have in your book, was on him. In fact, one of the funny things that was written about in one of the newspapers, very, very, very funny, was when Sellers was really attacking him, and somebody else in the House was getting on and saying, well, you take the counters off the players, and you guys, you do nothing but dominate everything. And my father said, well, let me address the camera problem. They said, he said, when Ed Sullivan shows Elvis, and Elvis is wiggling his hips, Representative Seller, he said, do they put the camera on the lower part of his body while he's wiggling his hips? And everybody laughed like hell. He said, it's the same thing. That story is written. It's out there.
Yeah.
Well, because he knew how to handle these politicians. He's the first, again, commissioner in sports history to register himself as a full-time lobbyist. And would get on the train every week and go down and testify in Congress.
So you think that relationship, if he had lived, the relationship with Al Davis would have been better than it was with Pete Rozelle?
Well, yeah, Davis, first of all, Davis wasn't in the picture at all at that time.
No,
Wayne Valley, actually. Davis was brilliant. Davis really screwed Wayne Valley out of the Raiders. Valley put up all the money. But Davis found, a brilliant guy, by the way, found a way that he ended up becoming the managing partner. And so I don't know how he would have dealt with Davis, but I felt he could really deal with anybody. And I'm not sure there'd be the animosity that you saw between Pete and Al. But I think also that Al would have been an interesting guy that would always be challenging people. But remember what happened here. They make him commissioner to really take on the NFL, directly. And so he goes out and signs all these quarterbacks and proves that the NFL, these guys aren't loyal to them. And of course, Wellington Mara makes the biggest mistake in signing Pete Gogolak and pisses everybody off in the league because that starts the real war. And I was in the middle of a lot of that because I was one of the babysitters that would hide these guys for days until the draft would come up. So I know all of the tricks of that trade. But I'm not sure that would have happened in that way. But then behind Al's back, Rosenblum and Schramm and Lamar and people decide, you know what, we don't want this war anymore. So we're going to make peace, but they never told Al, and I don't think Al ever got over that.
Yeah,
I think
I'm sure that's true.
That's where the real bitterness stood. But again, you don't know about history. Now, again, we didn't know that Bert Bell was going to resign as commissioner and become the owner of the Eagles again, but he still would have had a big voice in the league. Or maybe if he was healthier, he would have stayed on. He could get along with anybody. And I think he really liked Lamar.
Well,
and I think he liked the idea.
Yes. It's all in your book, Present at the Creation. It's still available on Amazon because I just bought it this week. So if anybody wants a good read, pick up Present at the Creation by Upton.Bell with Ron Borges.
I think the subtitle of that could be Witness to History.
Witness to History.
Matter of fact, one of the reviews on Amazon, one person had said about your book, it was the best book they have ever read about any sport, which is a hell of a tribute.
So,
well,
Billy,
go
ahead.
Well, one of the things that I asked Frank and you guys to read is basically two things that in this ranging conversation really changed my life in many ways. I remember I grew up with players. We lived in the same house together as a kid. The starting center, Bull Lipsky, got an extra $5 a week as a babysitter. I saw the good and bad things. I was never unhappy all during, the late. I lived in a hotel for the first couple of years. I lived in mansions. I've lived in flop houses. I lived everywhere, and really saw what the game was really like. But what really interested me, and again, I want to give you a little history, is that basically a lot of people don't know that in the All-Star game in the late 30s and early 40s, the NFL for a while did have African-American players. Nobody ever knows what really happened there because I never heard my father talk about And I never heard him discuss it with owners and stuff like that. I don't know the answer to that. But then there was a period there weren't. When they played the All-Star game in Chicago, the NFL had to get a waiver to play the college All-Stars because they were integrated, but the NFL wasn't. And one of the first great players in the All-Star game was Jackie Robinson.
Wow.
At UCLA. At UCLA.
At UCLA.
Whoa.
One of the great backfields, and you could go on and see it on YouTube, but one of the best backfields I've ever seen was Jackie Robinson, Kenny Washington, and Woody Strode, who went on to become an actor, and especially a member from Spartacus. And so Jackie Robinson was one of the top players. But how many people know or witness to history that basically the NFL had to get a waiver to play in the game because they didn't have any black players?
Incredible piece of history.
Wow.
And Woody Strode, of course, was the guy with the net that was always fighting Kirk Douglas with the trident. He was the trident guy, Woody Strode. Yeah,
Woody Strode. And again, all through my life years later, that came back up is in 1946, the first year. And I want you guys to know these stories because I want people to understand what it was like then and what it is like today. But again, as Santiana said, if you don't know past history, you're doomed to repeat it. And first 1946, my father goes to Chicago, and it's the first All-Star game, his first year as commissioner. He drops me at the Bears training camp, my brother. And on that team was Sid Luckman. And this is another story. I, as a child, knew something that only came out years later, and today would have been dynamite. Sid Luckman, the greatest quarterback of that era, his father was in prison for murder. And there's a book that you guys ought to read and get him on your show. His name is R.D. Rosen. Ironically, his ex-wife works for Martin Scorsese. And he captures what New York was like. His father was essentially a hitman and was in prison for murder. Can you imagine if that came out today? Could you imagine if it could come out then? But that first camp, I saw the beginnings of what is today the wide open offense. Clark Shaughnessy, George Hallis, Luke Johnsos, Patty Driscoll, three of them are in the Hall of Fame. I remember one night, and the right thing I like about Hallis, I was 9 years old. I always felt I was an adult. I never felt I was really a child. We walked into a room, and Hallis started saying, the two Bell kids, get them the hell out of here. Hallis said, sit down, Uppy. And on the board, I watched history. As what happened is that Clark Shaughnessy went to the blackboard, and in those days you had the fullback, the left halfback, the right halfback. He broke one off and put him out and said, here's how we are going to change. He didn't say change the game, but here's how we are going to have the new offense. That became the flanker, and today that's the wide receiver.
Wow. And
that's when football really got opened up.
Well,
I was in that room that day. It wasn't Appomattox Courthouse, but it wasn't far away from it.
Well, Upton,
what an amazing guest.
This has been fascinating, but I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the World Football League for 5 minutes, because you were the owner of the Charlotte franchise. My friend John Evenson, who hooked us up, was your PR director. My friend Jay Thomas was in Charlotte during those periods of times. And we also share a great friendship and a mutual admiration for Babe Pirelli, who was your coach at Charlotte, and then became my coach at Chicago. So why don't you talk about Babe for a second and the World Football League?
Well, again, there's always a backstory. I won Howard Baldwin had come to me, and a lawyer by the name of Bob Caparel. And Baldwin was one of the co-founders, not only of the WHA, but also the World Football League. And he had ended up partnering with Bob Smirtz, who owned the Celtics, but unbeknownst to me and other people, was running out of money. And so he wanted to sell the franchise. Now, guess who he was going to sell it to until he got too greedy? David Merrick, who was fresh off 1776 and was the big Broadway producer. And he kept asking for too much money, and finally Merrick turned it down. And Baldwin said, why don't you go to New York, meet with Smirtz? They're not doing well. They're playing out, the New York Stars are playing out on Randall Island, and see if you can make a deal. Well, we had Chinese dinner at his place. He handed me a check for $10,000. We signed a thing, if I can find some owners, I pay him off. And I said, I want to take the team to Charlotte, never going to make it in New York. Next day, press conference, I called Babe. At midnight, I said, Babe, goodbye to New York, hello to Charlotte. And I think he was in a state of shock. I said, meet me at the airport tomorrow. We're going to go down and have a press conference. Well, that day, Baldwin had to have a press conference and bring me in there and tell the New York media that I'm taking it to Charlotte. So I'll never forget Howard Cosell stands up and says, Mr. Bell, how dare you leave the great city of New York? This is a disgrace to your league. I said, Howard, if anybody gave a shit, they'd still be here.
Perfect answer.
I said, they're playing on Randall's Island. You can't even go to the toilet there. So Babe and I get on the plane. We go to Charlotte. Babe's in a state of shock. Charlotte loves it. We go to like a Holiday Inn there, or the Bangor Hotel. I get a guy to come down. We sell tickets. People out in the lawn. We sell 25,000 tickets, season tickets, out of the Bangor Hotel in like 3 days.
Whoa.
And the press is down there with pictures and capture all thing. Opening night. I then go down to Arnold Palmer Cadillac. My lawyer introduces me to Arnold. We have a great conversation. He said, all right, I'm going to get you a Cadillac and I'll invest in the team. I want my salesman to go to the game. So I got my first partner is Arnold Palmer for like $5,000. I get the gold Cadillac. and we have opening night. The town's going crazy. We have named the team. Everything was just great. And I remember saying, because I had scouted Charlotte for years when I was with the Colts, I said, this is fertile territory. This someday is going to be a franchise either for us or the NFL. So basically, everything going great, 2 or 3 sellouts. But then, as Frank knows, history hit us right in the face.
Yeah, other teams were giving away tickets and counting as paid attendance.
Well, yeah, Jack Kelly, the son of my father's best friend, John B. Kelly, Grace's father, he takes over what became the Philadelphia Bell. And
this is Grace Kelly's father, the Philadelphia oil man, right? Was he an oil man, John Kelly?
No, John B. Kelly. Here's an interesting story because I told Frank this. John B. Kelly and my father went to Penn together, and Kelly and he volunteered for the First World War while in college. They went to Europe, fought their way across Europe, came back, were great life friends. I'm telling Frank this story.
Blackjack Kelly, we're talking.
Huh?
Blackjack Kelly, right? That was his nickname?
Yeah, among other names. So Kelly calls my father one day. It's in the 50s. And he said, Bert, he called her Gracie. He said, Bert, Gracie that might think she has her first big break. He says, it's in this low-budget film called High Noon. He said, I don't think the goddamn thing is going anywhere. Of course, ends up being one of the great classics of all time and gives her a chance to go on and eventually win the Academy Award. But his son is the front man for the Philadelphia team, and they announced like 50,000 pages. Does this sound real, Frank?
Yep.
And the papers finally found out, there might have been 10,000 paid, and that's the league started to get themselves in trouble.
Yeah, they were papering the crowd.
And the crowd. But what happened with us is, another story is that basically we're getting ready. We had played Memphis, and we had played, I forget who else after that, but then we were due to go on the road. And this is right out of the Sheriff Dodge commercial. So we're playing in Shreveport, and I decide not to make the trip. And I get a call. I'm listening to the game. I get a call at halftime. It's from my business manager, and he said, "We got a problem here, Upton." I said, "What's the problem?" And he said, "Well, the place was surrounded by police before the game, and the head cop came in and told us that they were there to collect the money for uniforms for a cleaning service that Smirks never paid them for, and it's now like $30,000 or $40,000. So we should close the game down, but we're going to let you play the game. But after the game, we're taking the uniforms." So
That's true.
So I said to him, "Well, see if you can run right in the locker room and tell the players, don't take the uniforms on, jump onto the bus and get the hell out of there." It was like Bonnie and Clyde. We're going to take off from there. But he was right there with the sheriff. They took the uniforms. We had no uniforms to play with. We finally, I put up some of the money, and basically were able to play the next week. And then finally, the league voted us out. We were going to be in the playoffs for the championship. The league voted us out of the championship game because it'd be too much money to fly to the site to play the game.
Unbelievable.
Now, imagine trying to tell the press this. So the end of the first year, is the league going to make it in the second year, where Frank was with the Chicago win? So again, unbelievable. So we're trying to raise money, and the North Carolina National Bank, which was being run by Luther Hodges' son, Luther Hodges Jr. Hodges worked with the Kennedy administration, a guy by the name of Hugh McCall that just retired after the merger. So I get a call one day, and he said, my name is Frank Sasso. I'm from Tennessee. I've got a lot of money, and basically, I want to come up and I've got a model for an underground stadium. I'm saying to myself, you got to be kidding me. He said, but I want to come up and give you enough money to make it. So this guy comes up the next day. He's got a model of the stadium. I take him over to meet the mayor, whose name was John Belk, one of the richest men, Belk department stores in the South. Like the mayor likes a thing. He comes back and he said, basically, all right, I'll have a check in the next 3 days for you. Long story short, next day I get a call from Larry Talton, who's a sports editor of the Charlotte Observer. He said, who's this Paul Sasso? I said, well, it's the guy's come up here to try and help us bail out the team. He said, well, I felt like I was practically kidnapped. He said, he had these two guys pick me up. He said, they didn't blindfold me, but he said, they took me to this house outside of Charlotte. And, I went in there. He said, I felt kind of uncomfortable. And this guy, Paul Sasso, was telling me, about this new stadium, he's going to take over, he'll tell Bell what to do and everything else like that. Okay. Next day, the Charlotte News, which was also owned by the Observer, this guy by the name of Bill Ballinger, writes this story about this guy, Paul Sasso, who invites him to go on a plane with him, his private plane, to go up and meet with John Bassett to talk about the league and everything else like that. He said, two of the guys on the plane were brandishing guns. And he said he radioed Bassett, and Bassett didn't have time for him. So when he came back to the airport, there was the FBI at the airport waiting to handcuff him and take him away. And of course, can you imagine the media and all of this stuff going on? So what basically happened is, of course, the check never came. But turns out that Sassone, his name is Paul Sassone, he was in the Witness Protection Program in Tennessee. He stole the plane with his two friends. He came to Charlotte and sold this thing. But the story doesn't end there. As it's traced down now, named Paul Sassone, the mafia in New York thought he was wearing a wire and threatened to kill him, according to him. And he tried to commit suicide off the Verrazano Bridge and was talked out of it by what's his name, who's now on Fox, Geraldo Rivera. Can you imagine the picture? My alleged new partner was trying to commit suicide and was talked down off the bridge. So what happened in the end is the North Carolina Bank felt so sorry for us that they gave us the money to make it through the second year.
Wow, that's
And
great.
of course,
That's great. I know you could probably talk all night because you have left when you got out of the World Football League and you got out of football. You became a very successful New England talk show host for 30 or 40 years. And you could probably tell stories forever. But we want to thank you for being on with us. Again, the book is called Present at the Creation by Upton.Bell. It's available on Amazon. Upton, you've been a marvelous guest, and we may bring you
We'd
back
love to have you back
some other
Just
time
love
because
to.
we've only scratched the surface of what you know.
I would like to mention, because your guys' book is going to be in it.
Both of them, by the way, both of them.
That there are two collections, which is this part of my life to the end I'm really dedicated to. One is I love your book. That one is a collection of over 500 authors that I've interviewed over my 40-year career. Every book inscribed with the history of every writer in there, including two of the best interviews I've ever done. One was with the President of the United States at the White House just before we had Desert Storm. And the other was with one of the great minds of all time that actually invented black holes. You guys know what I'm talking about?
No, not Einstein.
No.
God.
Stephen Hawking.
Stephen
How
Hawkins.
was-
Thank you very much, Derek. Stephen Hawkins, of course.
How lucky was I? I never thought I had a chance to get him, and was able to get him on and had one of the most fascinating discussions, understanding that he's talking through a computer. But here's where I was really lucky. They liked the interview so much that when he came to Boston, they invited me to come in and see him before he spoke to the crowd at the Wilbur Theater. And I'll never forget, he had this puckish sense of humor. And I'll never forget walking out and saying, this is, like Einstein, one of the great geniuses of all time. And I said to myself, I'm not sure I'd want to be a genius and have to be in that chair.
Yeah.
Because that was a sad part of it. But that's the one collection. The other collection too, Frank, we're going to put your Jacksonville stuff and some of the other, is at UMass Amherst, which is the largest collection, I think, in the college in the country, looking at the game from 1885 all the way through to today, with artifacts including my Super Bowl ring and everything else. So as we have now traced back on my father's side, my grandfather's wife was the daughter of the man who was Abraham Lincoln's closest friend.
Wow.
And so all of that history is out there. It's going to be in both collections. You guys are going to be in both. And that's where I am right now.
Well, we'll sign Lamar's Gamble for you, and we'll also sign If These Lips Could Talk for you, and send them out to your home address this week. again, thank you so much, Upton. It's been a real honor and a pleasure to have you on. Billy?
Oh, I was just overwhelmed. I mean, it's certainly, you are a witness to history. And thank you so much for taking the time and for verifying our book. And your book is a terrific read. I recommend it for anybody out there to pick it up. Again, President to Creation. And thank you so much, Upton. Really a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much, Upton.
See you at the movies.
All right, brother. Thank you.
Thank you.
What a guy, huh?
Great guest.
Unbelievable. And
He's a great guest.
so kind when he validated our book and said that you can call it faction, you can call it anything you want, but pretty much all the facts are true, which was a really, really nice thing to hear from a man of his, well, he knows where the bodies are buried. You know, it's that simple.
Yep. Well, I think we've done enough show today.
Yes, we have.
Before we say goodbye, I'd like to give a special thanks to our friends at Be Big Communications. They manage our new sponsor, Weekend Coffee, and they're instrumental in the support of first responders and members of the media and the military. And I know that's very special to you. And they're also assisting us in our marketing of the Mook.com. So with that.
Yep. So long out there. And thank you so much. And you can find bebigcommunications.com if you interested in marketing. And we want to be grateful to them, of course.
And remember, Lamar's Gamble and If These Lips Could Talk are on Amazon or at mickamookanamike.com/books. So
thank you very much. With that, we'll sign off before we start. I was a young man when we started this podcast.
Before Derek runs out of memory.
Close.
Take care. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Next week's guest, Florida Trial Lawyer of the Year, marathon runner and stand-up comedian, Mike Freed.